For those of you who are now just joining us, one of the things that we're going to be really focused on today is people. And I think that when we talk about a lot of these technology topics and tools and things like that, we talk about all the cool things that the tools can do. We talk about the technology and we talk about how it's going to save you so much time and we talk about how it's going to change your workflow and all of those things. And that's all really cool. But today I want to focus more on who we're doing this for and why we're doing it in the first place. I want to talk more about people. So it's Thursday, it's exclusive day, and today's session is all about removing barriers to access. So we're going to be talking about what that means and how that played a major role in the development of XCL and the design of XCL and how we positioned this tool or built this tool to support the work that we do in learning and development in a way that has far less friction because a lot of what we do, at least in my experience, and I don't know, Corrine and Rob, you can chime in, but I really get frustrated with the barriers to trying to complete a task using technology. And they come up in a lot of different ways from a usability perspective, from your device, from logging into things from multiple screens. And then you run into other issues that were more from a design perspective or a UX perspective, not good color contrast, buttons not labeled correctly, forms out of order, weird stuff like that makes it very challenging to use. And so I know with me experiencing that, I have to believe that other people, that I'm not alone in that. I don't know. What say you, team? What is your experience in this,
I
in this
the
space with technology?
the bane of my existence is two-factor authentication. I understand from a security perspective why so many websites and products and things ask for that and want that. And also, like, just the barrier to entry to get to log into stuff at this point is, for me, like, where's my phone? And do I need to send it to email? Now, if I have to go into my email, how do I, like, it's like for a person who doesn't have a disability that would make that process even harder for me, it's still incredibly difficult to step through the process and frustrating and all of the things. That is my pet peeve. But I will say the color thing, and for those of you who know me personally and know my partner, he probably won't mind me talking about this. Extraordinarily colorblind. And when I say extraordinarily, I mean I wonder what colors he can actually see. I think the world to him has got the most extreme sepia lens of everything's just a shade of browns. And so I have become so much more aware of the limitations that he faces because of color that's built into things and contrast, yes, saturation, but just us thinking about color as visual references and things has created for him a daily challenge of how does he navigate those things in technology. So those are my two things. Maybe I think Sarah from a what say we around the difficulty of accessibility. Oh, and I have a kid who's deaf. Not to
Yeah,
ignore him, but I have a kid who needs transcription for everything. It's there's ongoing things I think just in my household that besides the things I get annoyed with that are real barriers for folks that I experience every day.
for sure. And I think that when you notice it, so when you become aware of it, then you notice it all the time.
Yeah.
And then you start to say things or think things like, who did this? Who designed this? Who let this get posted or put out here? How did someone miss this? Because when you become aware of it, you notice it all the time. I
Yep.
don't know, Rob, what about you? You build technology, right? You build software.
I do, and I have for a lot of years. And yeah, what I've noticed is that sometimes a new tool or a new thing will come out with a very new way of looking at a very basic thing, a new way to flow a form, a new way to visually dazzle a user by making each field appear only after you finish the last field or something like that. These are dev tricks that are, they're a flex from a developer's perspective of look what I can do, but they have absolutely no consideration for anyone other than fully sighted person with a mouse or tapping a screen. They don't include anyone else. And oftentimes those things are completely inaccessible. And the effort to make those accessible would be insurmountable after the fact because they weren't considered from the beginning. So a lot of times interesting components that you use in an app are really fun and exciting and meet a UX use case, make things exciting and fun, but are completely inaccessible and require an extraordinary amount of work, which the point of using a component is to save yourself a lot of work. So there's a selection process that I've gone through for years that makes sure that I choose components that start out accessible, that start out including the most number of people, reducing the highest degree of barrier. And then as we make them cooler, we do that with those things in mind. So yeah, and I totally agree about the two-factor authentication. As you were saying that, I was thinking I just months ago got a new phone, and I remember the first 4 or 5 apps, the first hours of using this phone was setting up all the authenticator apps and trying to find out if I've got all the right QR codes in there, if I've set up all the right line items for authenticator, because my old phone was basically useless. And every site I go to is, hey, where's your iPhone? And I'm like, I don't have an iPhone anymore. So yeah, I can't imagine how that experience works for people who maybe have a challenge doing those kinds of things. So that's my biggest concern.
I think that's such a good example. And you mentioned, Rob, when you were talking about that, the dazzle is for a certain UX use case. And I'm actually going to push back on that because I actually don't think that meets any UX use case because UX by default is user experience. And when you're thinking about user experience, it's all your users. And some of the things that seem to be like really fancy and interesting, and it's, woo, that's so cool at scale, or when you're doing that process all the time, it becomes really annoying because that's not how the rest of the web works. And so there are all of these UX principles that tell us that good UX is things working consistently so that you can get into a flow of work. So that when we talk about things being intuitive, we know that something is intuitive. There's a reason why it's intuitive. It's been designed so that it taps into things that you already recognize, into design affordances you're already used to, so that you do understand how to use it. And that goes the same way for anyone who might be accessing that information using assistive technology like a braille display or a screen reader. You have to build things in a way that people expect so that they understand how it should be used. And I think when we think about new UX design, or new, it's really UI design, right? New user interfaces that might be like, oh, I'm going to do something innovative. Innovation cannot undermine usability. And I think that happens a lot, Rob, to your point, is just this, I want to do something different and cool, but it's not cool if it's not usable. And so
Yeah.
the thing that when I think about innovation, I think about people designing user interfaces that fix a problem that people have been frustrated with for a really long time. That's good UI. That's good user experience design, is being able to identify the things that frustrate people and remove friction, remove those barriers. That's the cool thing.
Oh, absolutely. And Jacob, thanks for your comment. You mentioned a really important thing, which is from a developer's perspective, there are ways in regular sort of markup to do things that all screen readers are going to identify, everything's going to work properly. And then some developers like to change those things into other elements because they can make other elements do really cool, flashy, interesting things. And then your screen reader is completely lost. It doesn't know what a heading is. It doesn't know what a drop-down menu is. It can't identify a dialog box. So those are some of the things, some of the challenges we come up against, where when we were building this product, it's exactly what we did. We used all the basics, the regular elements, made sure things were normal and flowed correctly. I think you're correct. I might have been using the word UX in place of UI. We made sure that the language flowed easily, that it makes sense to do things the way that we're doing them, and that it's expected. You know that this thing is going to be here, that a menu is going to work as a menu's always worked in every other place that's decent, so that you can have that intuitive usability. And then there's this extra flashy, fun layer. We'll make it as fun as we can within those guidelines, but not at the expense of usability.
I definitely have a lot more fun whenever things are not difficult. And I think that one of the things that is interesting about how we built XCL is that we built it to be able to do the thing that it's very good at, which is create a link to any type of content that you can distribute however you want and track things without an LMS, without a login, without a learning platform. And so that was the function we wanted to perform. And our goal as a team was that would be as easy as it possibly could be for everyone. I don't care who's picking it up, who's using it. And if I make it as easy as possible for all of the personas that we were designing for. So we thought about folks who would be using a screen reader. We thought about folks who would be using a keyboard only. We thought about folks that might have color blindness. We thought about folks who might have ADHD or dyslexia. Everything from color choices to font types to how you might navigate it. We thought about those different design decisions and we did not have this brilliance imparted on us somewhere, right? There are guidelines you can follow. There are web content accessibility guidelines you can follow that help you design this stuff. It's not rocket science. Just like anything else that you do in any job, there are guidelines that tell you here's how to design this for people. And so we just followed those guidelines. And then we said it would be really cool to do this. It would be really interesting to do this. What benefit does that provide? What problem does that solve? And is this in line with our goal of being able to perform this task as easy as possible for everybody? And if all of those criteria are met, then cool, let's add confetti. But let's make sure that we have a way to toggle it off if folks want to toggle it off. If you want to turn off the confetti fun, turn it off because it's something that is distracting. It's too much. That's totally cool. You can turn it off. So being able to think about those design decisions up front made it super easy. So I wanted to ask Rob, like from a development perspective, when we went into this and I said, this is how we're going to do this, like this is the goal. And you said, okay, here's what I'm going to need. I'm going to need a really good UX designer that understands accessibility. And here's who you need to talk to. That's when we brought in Bryn Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked with Bryn and you from a development perspective, and then from a UI UX perspective, and then our team and our design team. So everyone on the team knew that accessibility was a core component of this and that we would be testing usability along the way. So we started that testing when we were designing it. And so
Yeah.
could you talk a little bit about how that showed up for you in your work?
Yeah, for sure. There's, as you say, we started at the design level, and Bryn Kennedy, a talented UX designer, understands the needs of people. She worked in a lot of those flows to include the right kind of language, the intuitive kind of flow. We broke the system down into components that were intuitive. And then how that sort of shows up for me is, from my perspective, I now know what my guidelines are. I know what box I have to work within from a component perspective to put these things together to make sure that we have a functional app that also meets those criteria and is simple and works well, that we can design tests for that make sure that we're meeting those criteria. And then there's this idea of, we didn't just start with XCL, we started with a very basic version of XCL, which was a flat form, literally just a form, a bunch of fields. It was ugly, but it worked. It did the job. It was a proof of concept that we've used internally. And then as that sort of matured along the way through iteration, we iterated it, continuing with that reduction of barriers for all the different types of people. And I think that's what separates us from maybe other tools, where accessibility is a part of the roadmap. Is now we're going to focus on accessibility, and now we're going to do all this work. And what ends up happening a lot of times, a lot of companies I've worked with, is the volume of work to get something really slick, cool, and hasn't been really designed for low barriers for certain groups of people never ends up getting there by virtue of the fact that the cost and the time involved to do it after the fact far exceeds what some leadership group would consider value for money, considering the small size of the group. And it's unfortunate, but that's a reality. And a lot of small sort of startup companies, before that group gets big enough to have a voice, don't really include accessible characteristics, don't really think about testing with a screen reader, don't think about tab order and using a keyboard to fully navigate complex things like steppers or menu systems or context menus, things like that. And especially with considering alerts or toasts, as we call them, those little kind of green or red kind of call outs that tell you what's going on. A lot of those things miss the bar. So if you tried to close your eyes and listen to Jaws, you'd have no idea where you are in a lot of applications. And what we wanted to do is make sure that all those things were visually represented as the design called for, because that was important for the user experience and for the UI, but also were accessible and came up at the right times and did the right things so that for other groups, they would also be experiencing the same thing in the same way. They would have an experience that's intuitive, that they
Right.
understood when they click something and something happens, that they know something's happening. Even though it's happening behind the scene, there's a little loading animation, the screen reader doesn't always call that out unless you tell the screen reader to call that out.
I love that you mentioned how you think about designing for it in advance, because when I use XCL, I'm not using it with assistive technology. I'm going through this visually. And I do switch back and forth between my keyboard and my mouse though. So I navigate with my keyboard as well, and I tab through forms and things like that. For me, I think that XCL is beautiful and functional. And so I get the benefits of the fact that this has been designed and developed to be accessible. I get all the benefits from that because all of those barriers have been removed. I'm not forced to use my mouse. I'm not forced to go through your weird floating in form. I'm not forced to try to figure out what is happening on this screen because you've not written good instructional text. I'm not forced to try to figure out what goes in this field because you haven't labeled your form fields appropriately. I don't have to do that. When I use my 1Password, my password autofill, it knows that's a password field because it's been programmed appropriately. Because when you build things to be accessible for people, it's more accessible to the robots. And I know I say this all the time, mainly because I talk about technology a lot, but accessibility is it's a fundamental part of what we do and what we build. And if you're not thinking about accessibility, why are you even doing this? Like, why would you build software if you don't care if people can use it? Why would you build a tool that you're not actually thinking at all about whether somebody can actually use that tool when you're building it? That makes zero sense. But people just move right along and do it all the time. And to your point, Rob, they say, well, we're going to put this, we'll get around to the accessibility. We'll make it accessible because they think about it like, I want to make it accessible at some point to people with disabilities, not realizing that making it accessible to people that have disabilities is making it more accessible and usable to everybody. And if you're going to do it later, you're probably never going to do it, and your tool's always going to be crap.
For
I know
sure.
that
Yeah.
you usually talk to learning people, Sarah, but you need to be speaking to the product folks and engineers right now.
Trust me, I have. And the
I
sad
know.
thing is that you reach out to product people and you say, hey, this isn't working. Hey, this isn't functional. It's on our roadmap. If I had a dollar for every time somebody told me something was on a roadmap when their tools were fundamentally broken and inoperable and not working and not doing the thing that they're supposed to do, I wouldn't have to run a business anymore because I've heard on my roadmap my whole career. And that's just short for I'm probably not going to do it unless somebody pays me to, or gives me enough money, or sues me, or it becomes a big enough issue where I feel like I now have to do that.
Yeah, because I'm a product person, I'm gonna weigh in on this. So here's what I'll say. I've worked for organizations that have thought about accessibility as a side project or as something that they've done years after they built their initial product and now they have to figure out how to try to make it accessible because customers start asking for their VPAT or customers start asking about accessibility features. They want to sell into government. Like, just depending on the nature of the customer base, eventually it will come up, that question. And almost always in those instances, they create an accessibility roadmap that may or may not get addressed over time in some indiscriminate time frame. And if they're at least thoughtful about it, they won't dig themselves a deeper hole, but it may take years or never for them to fix the original design and how they built the product initially. I've also worked for companies that have thought about accessibility from the beginning. And those organizations are the ones that do care more deeply about the user experience and the usability of their product overall, and that accessibility wasn't seen as a side project, it was seen as something that would make their overall product better. And so I think, and sadly, that type of organization and software company is fewer and farther between. But I do think, like your point, and I just saw Jacob in the notes said, he asked to see a roadmap and it was 3 years old. I think that's very common because from a product leadership perspective, you are fighting a battle of do we focus on accessibility, which may or may not make my organization more money, versus other features that are coming in. And unless your C-suite is really committed to making this part of how they think about product design and the product they offer to the market, those trade-off conversations are really hard. They're
Right.
really hard because you've got stakeholders that are looking at dollar signs. And it's a very smart organization that understands accessibility does mean dollar signs. It's just not in the way that they think about it.
And
So,
that is such an excellent point because one of the things when I was working through my CPAC, so that's a Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. And so it's more the broader understanding of accessibility across different domains, even physical, like built environments. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is the business case for accessibility and how if you're selling something, when you don't build your tool or your software to be accessible, you're actually eliminating part of your target market. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to sell it to only this type of person, which is weird because why would you just completely take a whole market segment? You got potential customers that would pay for your tool or would pay for your software if they could just use it. And then you have all the other folks who will get really frustrated and stop using your tool or software if somebody comes along and does it just a little bit better. And so it's ignorant to me. And I think I read an article this morning, I think with AI and all of the things that are happening right now in the technology space and speeding up, I think some of these monolithic software companies who have gotten by with these really terrible platforms are going to start feeling a lot of pain from the decisions that they failed to make early on about accommodating people, the people that use their tools. Because I don't know about all the rest of y'all that work in the technology space, but for the last 25 years, I have gone to conferences, I've talked to vendors, I've talked to people in the tech space and said, please, can you fix this one thing? Like, I need an alt text field, or I need this thing to work. And people would say, oh, but look over here at these avatars that'll talk to each other. And I'm like, please stop spending money on stupid stuff that nobody asked for, and please spend money on fixing what's broken in your platform. And if you go to any big software company to their Reddit, to a Reddit thread or any kind of anything on the internet, there will be droves of comments and complaints of please fix this. It's been 10 years, it's been 5 years. Why can't you fix this? And to your point, Corrine, somebody in some leadership position is getting paid from some VC funder that's saying, I want you to make avatars that talk to each other. I want you to put AI stuff in there that has a conversation with me. Please do the magic trick instead of making your tool functional and do the thing that you actually are supposed to do with your tools or your software. And
so
so I
the,
think
the
that's what
lesson
is very
here is
frustrating.
do it from the beginning.
Right.
Yeah.
Think about it from the start, because if you don't build that into your DNA, it is always that tension of are we going to fix what isn't working or are we going to build something new? And depending on the culture of the company and the leadership, the something new may always override the fix the stuff that isn't working. And that I think is a mistake.
Yes.
But that is the reality of what happens. So if you think
Yes.
about it from the beginning, You are not forced with making that decision. It's built into your processes. It's built into your thinking. It's built into your acceptance criteria for any new feature that you build. It's like, this isn't ready until it's accessible.
Yeah, like when one little thing doesn't work, or someone mentions, hey, this is difficult for me, or this is a barrier. If you've thought about these things from the beginning and you're built accessible and you're built for people, fixing that one thing is far less daunting. If I think of some of the software projects I've worked on in the past, making them accessible, even just to screen readers, like just one scope, which is one small scope of a grand scope of things that you need to consider. Just doing that would be a year of work in planning, development, testing, tens of thousands of dollars in testing and retesting. And when you consider that investment versus avatars and AI, and then investors will be interested in buying shares because we now have avatars and AI. The decision will never be made to support those other groups. And their companies are willing to say, I won't sell to this enterprise because this enterprise demands accessibility. However, my stock value will rise because I have avatars. One little, I can say it's AI generated content. And that is unfortunate, but as you say, there's dollar signs in making software for people because we don't generally make software just for software's sake. We make it to solve a problem, and that problem needs to be solvable by more than just one persona of people.
And I want to bring up two things. So, one, I want to give a little bit of grace to the companies who just didn't know what they didn't know. And then they found out, and then they tried to make changes, and they realized there's a lot of retrofitting to be done, but I'm committed to it. An example of that I've been seeing is Articulate. And there are a lot of things that really frustrate me with using their tools. And so I'm not saying go out and buy Articulate Suite because there are lots of tools that are more accessible in different ways. But what I am saying is that they're an example of an organization who said, we realize that we have a problem and we're going to try to figure out a way to fix it. And they've gone through a maturity model process where they're trying to figure out ways to make changes. And so when you find out what you're doing and you have a commitment to try to change it, I want to give those companies a little bit of grace. I also want to address a comment that Jacob had in the chat, and that is that how much does it cost to do this if you plan for it from the start? And as a small business, right? So we are a global organization, but compared to software vendors, we are not big. Build Capable is not a huge software vendor yet. But what I will say is that when we built this tool, and I have all the money insights here, it didn't cost us anything extra because we just built it that way. So that's not true. The only thing that it cost us extra was doing our VPAT, which is our voluntary product accessibility template. So it's basically filling out a template to say this is how accessible this tool or software is to the web content accessibility guidelines. So going through that process, we worked with OLED Media, which is a good partner of ours. And the owner of that accessibility company is Bello Miguel Carpiani, and he's actually in Design for All Learners, which is a book on designing for accessibility and universal design that I edited and put together over the last few years. But their team worked on our VPAT so that we could have our accessibility conformance report or our ACR, which is published on our website. So we did pay to go through that auditing process to have our audit for the website and also our audit for XCL. And so that does cost money, and it depends on how big your software is and how many processes and that kind of thing. So it's priced out differently, but we're talking about very minimal cost. But from a development perspective and a design perspective, it didn't cost us anything different. We just made those design decisions as we went. And I use the curb cut example because if you think about curb cuts being accessible for lots of different folks, that's really cool. But if you don't think about cutting that curb when you're pouring the sidewalk, and then you have to go cut those curbs later, it's going to be super expensive. But if you just pour it while you're pouring the concrete, then it's not costing you anything extra. So you have to think about what decisions are you making along the way. And when we've gone through this VPAT process, we don't really have to fix anything. Rob, you had a couple of form field labels that they said maybe consider wording this a little differently.
I used IDs where I should have used names in one spot, which missed an automated test, but we were so much further ahead than if we hadn't considered anything
Right.
at all. We'd be 6 months out, even given the small size of our tool. We'd be
Yeah.
6 months of development time to ramp backward through all those fun flows and those fun UIs, all the components that we use, the drag and drop piece that is keyboard accessible. Like that would have been nightmare fuel
Yeah. It
from a
was a
developer's
huge,
perspective.
for sure. It was that one of the biggest compliments of my career was to get back from the OLED media team. They said, we didn't even write a report because you all are like honors students and that we could just say, here are the 5 things for you to fix. And so that process for us has been painless. It's just, here are a couple of things. We'll work it into this next sprint. We have a new release that's coming out this week that will have the new updates in it. You probably won't even notice them because they were so small that unless you use a screen reader, you will notice those things, right? But it was so minimal that it wasn't even a big effort to fix. So thank you for asking that question, Jacob, because I think it's really important for people to understand that it is not expensive to build accessible software. It is expensive when you build something and don't think about it and then have to go back and deconstruct and rebuild your system. That's what's expensive. But if you think about this stuff up front, if you're a good designer, it's not gonna be expensive because you're just gonna do it as you're doing it. You'll just make those color choices and you'll just build it that way and design it that way. So it doesn't take that extra time. I would say the only thing that taps into our resources at all is just us checking things. So before we have a release, we check things in UAT, user acceptance testing, and we also check it for accessibility. I tab through it. I use just my keyboard only to check it. I use a screen reader. I use VoiceOver because I'm on a Mac. So you might use different types of screen readers based on what you have accessible to you. And then we have formal processes where we have natural user testers that are checking that as well on an ongoing basis. But I think for today, where I want to leave everyone with is that I encourage you to check out XCL. And when you're testing it and playing with it, think about your user experience compared to other tools and platforms that you use. Do you notice any differences? Or do you not notice? You're just like, this is so easy to use. Why is this so easy to use? And a lot of that experience is because of how we designed and built it to be accessible to everyone and not just the output and what the learners are going to get, but the administrators who use this tool. If you are a screen reader user or you use a braille display or you use assistive technology, you can use XCL to build links and distribute them and track that data. This is built for you. So I want to encourage folks to test it out, use it, give us feedback. There are multiple ways to contact us if you experience any barriers that we can handle right away. So thank you all for joining us today and talking about the accessibility of XCL and removing barriers to access. Remembering that it's not just for folks with disabilities, it's for all of us to make this process easier, not having to go log into an LMS, just getting this content, getting access to it, getting what you need, and moving on with your day. We are excited that you all have joined us today, and we look forward to having you join us in our next exclusive. Thanks, everyone.